I am now going to be joined by the delightful and insightful Brian McKenna, who's the VP of CRM at DMi Partners. And Brian has spent 19 years at DMi, and he's an absolute expert in supporting brands and how they can grow their CRM database and optimize the experience for each of these brands. We're going to have a chat about some actionable tips for marketers who are developing direct-to-consumer marketing strategies. And we're going to have that chat in framework of some of the amazing things that we've heard today as a little bit of a recap and maybe a little bit of a rapid fire between me and Brian, since I'm aware we're getting to the end of the day and I think we might need to, we'll add a little extra energy. And so Brian, welcome.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here, and I agree with your approach. I think this will be good. Just let's get into some stuff that will hopefully help some folks out. Great.
Well, let's get right into it then, shall we? We launched some research that we talked about at the beginning of the day, and I shared one of the stats that 51% of consumers say that their experience with the brand does not feel personalized, and that only 16% of marketers are telling us that they excel in this new engagement-driven landscape. What opportunity do you think there is for marketers to use customer engagement to differentiate themselves?
That's a great question. And actually, I think those numbers actually certainly ring true with what we're seeing in the space. And if anything, I think they might be conservative. I think, some of it is, just from a brand play. I think to some extent, you need to build that relationship with people, and people are expecting a personalized experience to have that relationship. I also think there's an element of it that it's going to be a requirement. We're seeing technology change more and more. The introduction of iOS 18 adding tabs to people's email experience and the introduction of Apple Intelligence. I think there's just going to be more and more where to cut through the noise and to be getting people to go to their promotions tab or to ideally be arriving in people's primary inboxes. You're just going to need to build more of that engagement, and the best way to do this through personalization. And then I think the last piece of this is, I think at the end of the day, there's a use case of just ROI. It's in your best interest, especially for any clients that are driving people back to the site to complete a purchase. We consistently see that it's going to drive the biggest return on your investment is if you can really deliver that personalized experience. Our mantra is kind of deliver the right message to the right person at the right time, and and that's been the tried and true path towards revenue as well. So,
could not agree more. Building on that, our theme for Festival this year is Intelligent Marketing in Motion. And earlier today, we were really privileged to hear from John Martz at Gibson, and he talked about their evolution of selling guitars purely from retail stores and partners to building a complete D2C strategy, which is really quite remarkable. And despite being a relatively old brand, they've been around for 100 years, they managed to find a way to keep things moving and to use customer engagement to really amplify and extend their customer relationships. So thinking about brands who might be in a similar state as they were a couple of years ago, what would your words of encouragement be if you're just starting to build this D2C strategy?
Definitely. We work with a lot of consumer packaged good brands, so we know this story very well of either they're starting out the D2C experience or where DTC is completely new to them. And really with any of those clients, the elements that we preach are definitely the crawl, walk, run approach. I think in terms of thinking through how do we get started, the biggest thing we say is, okay, let's just get started. And a lot of how we think through that is really thinking through the customer journey and thinking through doing some journey mapping and doing things in a way that can be scalable. So thinking through for every automation that you set up, that's now something that lives in that ecosystem. Let's make sure we're setting it up that's something that's can be, evergreen, but really thinking through how can we personalize that experience so that at scale, we're delivering, biting off pieces towards that personalized life cycle journey. So a lot of that for our clients will start with, say, the welcome series. Where does somebody opt in? What do we want that experience to be if somebody opts in and hasn't purchased? What do we want that experience to be if someone opts in and then purchases, and just kind of picking off pieces, and then eventually you've got a full customer lifecycle journey in the wild.
Funny how that happens when you start to focus on it and you get things moving.
Exactly.
So on a really different note, there was I thought the session that we had earlier today with Pernod Ricard and Meta, which really focused it on blending innovation and creativity, but still in the world of omnichannel and driven by data and thinking about what that customer really wants. If you're looking at brands who are looking for a competitive edge and you want to use customer engagement as that competitive edge and are in a complex competitive industry like the food and beverage one for Pernod Ricard, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, and I think one of the things we consistently see here is that there's just different audience members. So for our clients where they have an e-commerce experience, or if they don't, what we tend to find is like a lot of people are not coming to the site and ultimately going to be buying, a bottle of liquor or something on the website, even if they do offer it. And so it's really thinking through, what are the other ways that I can deliver a personalized experience if I can't rely on, at least for sections of our audience, an abandoned cart or a post-purchase and all those things, and really thinking through, okay, what are those personalized engagements that can go out based off of any sort of interaction with our site. And sometimes that's, viewing recipes, sharing recipes, product reviews, and really thinking through some like unconventional outside of the box engagements that really are tailor-made for follow-up messages or journeys of messages. And so that's where we're like spending a lot of our time with our clients that are not featuring that D2C, or where it's a complicated D2C experience, and thinking through, okay, how can we take those lessons from the DTC world and build, really personalized journeys that make sense. At the end of the day, what we see is if it's a message that is going to drive value and people will be interested in because we've learned it's really highly tailored to them, then it's a message that's going to work. So just kind of like thinking through, again, that life cycle and those experiences that are teed up for those communications to go out as a follow-up.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, that goes back to something that Gibson also talked about in terms of their app and how they're offering guitar lessons to beginners, right? That's a different kind of content, a different kind of engagement. It's not perhaps as traditional, but for them, it's very important and about treating their customers as fans. So I think that is very much emphasizes what you've said. Don't be focused only on the transactional type engagements. Think more broadly, think more creatively as you're engaging with your customers.
I think there's good lessons even from the previous session where you want to make sure you're carrying through. So if you know someone's a beginner and they're taking beginner lessons, you don't want to be featuring advanced to, anything towards those people. So just making sure that's kind of like that whole iterative approach, but building and building that personalization at scale.
Exactly. So let's switch focus a little bit. We've seen an incredible growth in consumer packaged good marketers as they look to really build up personalization and automation into their efforts. And I'd love to hear from your perspective, what opportunities do you see for brands that might not be direct to consumer or feature just an e-commerce experience? How does that work for them?
And certainly I don't want to say that this is true for everyone in that space, but for our clients in the CPG space, a lot of them really view their CRM efforts as almost like a market share opportunity. They're trying to constantly be tracking towards what is the size, how many people are we seeing as loyally engaged subscribers. They're really trying to stay in front of those people so that they can ultimately be influencing their purchase decisions when they're at a local store or wherever they're purchasing those products. And so the path towards engagement has gotten more difficult, especially with a lot of the changes. It's harder to stay in the inboxes. It's harder to stand out in the inboxes. And so it's that engaged piece that we're seeing a lot of those brands struggle. And a lot of like their tried and true, okay, we'll just send out a monthly or bi-monthly newsletter and we'll stay in front every so often we'll include a coupon, just aren't working. And so really the path for them is much more that personalized experience and building out, like I said, some more unconventional messages that will go out that will drive people back to the site and then capitalize on the engagement. So when someone does take those actions, there's queues to be set up to send follow-up messages that make sense. And we do see that there's very much an iterative process to that. If you can drive one engagement and send a good follow-up, then they tend to come back and take other and so like that makes kind of improves everything both on the positive, people are staying more engaged, and you also see less people dropping off and becoming unengaged or unsubscribing, any of those negative aspects.
So I think that's really key. And a big part of that, and we've talked about the layout and the creative and the channels and the data, but the messaging is just as important, right? Because if the messaging in that piece of content that's trying to drive an engagement isn't right, then you're not going to get that engagement. So tell me a little bit about what strategies you've seen at work for creating that compelling messaging amongst all the other things we've talked about that you have to worry about as a marketer.
Yeah, and that's always a fun conversation. With new clients or prospective clients, they're at the end of the day, they're saying, well, we're selling toilet paper here. How much can we say about toilet paper? And I guess early in the pandemic, there was a lot to say about toilet paper. But I guess like in terms of like those brands, what we tend to find is like they're constantly putting out content. It's again a lot more of the thought process of like how can we take what you're already creating and package it up and send it as at the right time to folks. So in terms of like getting real creatives, oftentimes those brands are doing contests, sweepstakes, if they're doing any sort of like there's a big focus today is like on different like holidays or I forget what the silly things are, but really capitalizing on anything that would make sense to send out as messages, and then leveraging their already in market content creation processes to really capture on that and maximize the reach of those. And so oftentimes we'll find that a lot of our brands are doing upcoming sweepstakes. How can we make sure that we're getting that out to their existing audience, using it as an opportunity to refer friends, those types of things. And then whenever it does drive engagement, making sure you have that a better mousetrap where there is engagement, it's sending more of those messages that are good follow-ups based off of it.
I think there's some very, very good advice in there for people to think about on a daily basis. You get caught up in the, I need to do. Stop and kind of think about some of these things and make sure you're not overdoing it, because it's so incredibly easy to do. Thank you so much, Brian, for your insights. If anybody would like to connect directly with Brian, I know he would be delighted to do so and to share any insights we didn't get to today, and I'm sure there are plenty of them. Brian, thank you again for your time today, for helping us really wrap things up in the best way possible, and look forward to seeing you perhaps another one of these in the not too distant future.